and welcome to Capitol Hill. I'm Samantha Hawley. The opposition's announced its first major policy ahead of the September election. It says its national broadband network will be delivered earlier and for less, although it won't match the government's promised download speeds. The opposition leader, Tony Abbott, says it's a policy he's proud of. The Communications Minister, Stephen Conroy, describes it as dumb.
Fibre to the node, and that cost, and that eliminates 2/3 of the cost. So we will be able to do this for under $30 billion compared to the over $90 billion that it will cost the national broadband network. We'll also be able to do it that much more quickly because fibre to the node can be rolled out that much more quickly and that much more simply than fibre to the premises.
Malcolm Turnbull is going to build a one-lane Sydney Harbour bridge because he says he can do it cheaper and faster. Well, yes, in 1927 they could have made a decision to build a one-lane Sydney Harbour bridge. But fortunately for the people of Sydney, they thought about the future. They had a vision for the future of the city of Sydney, and they built the icon that is the Sydney Harbour Bridge.
To discuss the Coalition's broadband announcement and other events of the day, I'm joined now by the Liberal MP, Tudge in Melbourne, and the Labor MP, Stephen Jones, who's in Sydney. Good afternoon.
G'day, Sam. G'day, Stephen.
First to you, Alan. Stephen Conroy's analogy, is that right? In a sense it must be, isn't it? Australians will be getting less because the Coalition would be paying less.
Well, what we're actually promising is at least 25 megabits per second by 2016 and at least 50 megabits per second by 2019 to every single premises in the country. And it will be more affordable to residences and it will be considerably cheaper to the taxpayer, some $60 billion cheaper. That's what our commitment is.
But it will be second rate. It won't be as good as the system that the government is offering, 100 megabits per second the government's offering. So you're paying less, you're getting less.
Well, the government is talking about this and has been talking for 6 years now about their proposal. But, Sam, they are 98% short of their targets. They said that they would have passed 500,000 residences by now, and they only have 10,000 people who have connected. So they're 98% short of their target. They've already spent $7.5 billion. And so when their proposals will be fully implemented is anybody's guess at this stage.
Stephen Jones, that's true, isn't it? The rollout is much slower than expected. Should people be concerned by that?
Well, not in my electorate where the trucks are already rolling through the streets of places like Dapto and Horsley. And what Tony Abbott's announcement today, a policy that his minister doesn't believe in and Tony Abbott himself doesn't understand, what he's announced today is essentially a direction, return to barracks because the NBN isn't going to be rolled out in your neighbourhood. Now let me tell you, quite literally, my grandfather used to be an electrician. When he started his apprenticeship, they wouldn't put anything more than one PowerPoint in every room because they couldn't understand why people would need more than one PowerPoint in every room. That's the equivalent of what Tony Abbott and Malcolm Turnbull have announced today. Well, a policy that's going to be obsolete before it's completed. We know that because today...
not quite though, Stephen Jones, because you'll still be getting 25 megabits per second or up to 50 megabits per second. That's a lot faster than anyone has in their homes at the moment. The counter-argument, of course, could be that the government is going too far, that it's giving people more access than they actually need and spending valuable money where it could be spent elsewhere.
It gets back to that one PowerPoint per room argument, Sam. And here's what we know. Today, the ABS released its report on the growth in data demand, exponential in Australia. Over 1.2 million Australians already have a subscription for a data service of 25 megabits per second or greater. That's what we have right now. We know it is going to grow exponentially because of the demand for video-based applications. So what Tony Abbott and Malcolm Turnbull announced today, a policy that Tony Abbott doesn't understand and Malcolm Turnbull doesn't believe in, is a policy that will be obsolete before it's completed. What we need, and what the Coalition at least acknowledges, that Australia wants a national broadband network. Suburbs in my own electorate need it because they don't even get ADSL-based technology at the moment. We need it.
Okay, I might cut in on you there because suburbs in your electorate or people in your electorate and others also need an NDIS, they also need the education reforms. All of these things need to be paid for. Is there no room here to wind back a bit this program and spend some of this money elsewhere?
Now, let's talk. The NBN is a piece of infrastructure which will pay for itself, and it's a piece of infrastructure that is going to be put in the ground and be of use to Australians, not just now but over the next 50 years. So there's a very good argument if people over the next 50 years are going to get a benefit out of a piece of infrastructure, then they should be paying some price for the cost of that infrastructure and the rollout of that infrastructure. Nothing wrong with that at all. But there's a second problem with it. There's a second problem with the announcement today, and it goes directly to people in regional Australia. They are abolishing the universal pricing arrangement that Labor has put in place. What that means is service providers will be able to charge higher prices for people in regional Australia than capital cities. Why the National Party members are agreeing to this, I cannot believe.
Right.
But I tell you, we'll be fighting against it because it's not good for electorates like mine.
Alan, on that point, Tony Windsor has come out against the Coalition's policy today, saying it will divide the cities from the bush again. Your reaction to that? Will that happen?
I think to the contrary, because our policy will prioritise those 2 million premises which currently have completely inadequate broadband service, the type that Stephen was in fact talking about, where people cannot even get ADSL 2+ at the moment. So our priority will be those people, and many of those are in fact in regional areas. So whereas under the government's proposed NBN, which they've been talking about for 6 years now, but cannot outline when exactly they will be delivered, we will promise to those people that we will deliver at least 25 megabits per second within 3 years, within our first term. And you can hold us to account for that at the end of our first term. And then within a further 3 years, by 2019, at least 50 megabits per second, but up to 100 megabits per second. And furthermore, I'll take up Stephen's point about saying you're only building a single-lane harbour bridge. I mean, we are building planning on building a network which is affordable, which will deliver to most people. And in addition, it creates option value down the track so that if we need to further develop, then there is that capacity to do so.
I will just ask you, Alan, lastly, because there has been some confusion. The Coalition is claiming a $60 billion saving in its policy.
That's right.
Well, the government estimates at the peak are $44 billion. Your plan would cost $29.5 billion. That is not $60 billion worth of savings.
But a lot of the experts now are saying that the government will never build the NBN for $45 billion because it is so far behind schedule and because the take-up has been so low that some of the experts are now saying that it will be a $90 billion plus build. Because bear in mind, most of the cost is actually taking that piece of fibre from the top of your street and digging through every front person's garden, every person's front garden. That's where most of the cost is, and that's why it's blowing out astronomically.
All right, well, let's move on to another issue of the day, arguably the biggest news story of the day. Of course, the former British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher has died. She was 87. There's been worldwide comment about her death, of course, also from Australian leaders, from the Prime Minister Julia Gillard and the opposition leader Tony Abbott. Let's hear what they've had to say today.
The world has woken to the news that Margaret Thatcher has died. I did want to offer my condolences to Margaret Thatcher's family. Margaret Thatcher was a woman who changed history for women. Obviously, Margaret Thatcher and I did not share a political outlook on the world, but as a woman, I am admiring of her achievements, becoming the first woman to lead the United Kingdom, the first female Prime Minister there.
Margaret Thatcher is one of the all-time greats of democratic politics. She put the great back into Great Britain. She gave Britain a future as well as a past. She was a great champion of markets, of democracies, of choice, of freedom.
Stephen Jones, first to you. She was loved and she was loathed, but it seems all Australian politicians are united in her death, all tribute in a sense today.
Look, I don't think I could put it in any better words than the Prime Minister herself. Obviously a very important person in world history over the last century, a controversial leader, but an important leader. The fact that she was Great Britain's first female Prime Minister deserves mention and credit in and of itself. So at a time like this, it's not appropriate to be talking about the controversial aspects of her leadership. It's more important, more appropriate to be merely passing on the condolences to her family and noting the fact that she's been a very important person in the 20th century history.
Alan, obviously the Prime Minister pointing out there that Margaret Thatcher was Britain's first Prime Minister, Julia Gillard is ours. Will she go down in history in the same way, do you believe?
No, I don't think Julia Gillard will go down in history as the same way as Margaret Thatcher. I mean, Margaret Thatcher was one of the giants of the 20th century. She, along with Ronald Reagan, did more to end communism and to end the Cold War than any other person. And in addition, her economic reforms, which brought back great prosperity to the United Kingdom, formed, in some respects, an economic blueprint for many other nations, including Australia. And so Margaret Thatcher is one of the all-time greats, as the Prime Minister and opposition leader Tony Abbott said today.
All right, now look, just very briefly, we will touch on one other issue of the day. The government is now looking at including science in the NAPLAN test, the school test. Obviously, we currently have maths, reading and writing there. Stephen Jones, maybe to you first. Do you think science has been lacking from that test? Is it, I guess, the lost subject in a sense?
Well, here's what we know. If you look at the findings of the Gonski report, the most important analysis of school education in this country in the last 40 years, he said the two areas where we're falling behind in the country, in the region, are maths and science. We need to get some baseline data in this area. The Commonwealth Government has already invested a significant amount of money to assist the states in developing their programs to train more science teachers and to ensure that we can get people from the sciences into our classrooms. So I think it's an appropriate move. It's one that should be shared across the political spectrum. It's just disappointing that at the same time we aren't getting more agreement from the premiers to implement the recommendations of the Gonski review, because we are going to take a step forward in terms of school education. It means increasing resources, increasing teacher quality and outcomes for our students in maths, in science and in other areas as well.
And Alan, your thoughts? I mean, has this been missing up until now? Are we not giving enough focus, I guess, to science in this country?
Well, the National NAPLAN tests in science, I think, are a good development, and they build on the developments over the last 2 decades, frankly. Started out by Dr. Kemp in 1997. The real issue here, though, in science, I think, is the lack of students who are studying science at Year 12, which has had a considerable decline over the last decade. And part of that is driven by the lack of science teachers. I was looking at the data, and out of the 73,000 students who are doing a diploma of education, only 550 actually had a science degree, so an extraordinarily small number. We need to be attracting more people with science degrees into teaching so that they can inspire the next generation.
Fantastic. All right, well, look, we will have to leave it there. We're out of time. Alan Tudge in Melbourne, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Sam.
And Stephen Jones in Sydney, thanks for joining us.
Good to be with you.
And that is Capitol Hill for today. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Until then, goodbye.